All right, today we're going to be measuring for the shade. Get someone to help you with this. It's going to make it a lot easier. Find where you're going to mount your shade and have them go all the way against the wall. And pull the tape measure kind of as tight as you can get it. Get your measurement. And also when you're measuring, make sure to look out for any obstacles you might run into on the side, like this exhaust here. Luckily we're not going to be hitting that, so we don't need to measure for that, but if you are, you would take the distance from here to there, and that would be your narrowest point. Alright, now what we're going to do is we are going to determine the drop of the shade, and to do that we're going to measure from the highest point there to the lowest point, and ours is going to be 10 feet, and this particular customer wants their shade to finish 16 inches above the ground. So with those 16 inches plus the 2-inch deduction at the top, total deductions are going to be 18 inches, which will give the total drop in this 8 foot, make the total drop in this 8'6". All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to measure for the placement of the head rod clamps. And to do this, we first have to find the edge of our shade, which is typically 1 inch from the edge of the deck here. And from that mark, we're going to come in 12 inches. And this will give us the placement for our first head rod clamp. And then to mount the head rod clamp at the highest, we're going to come 1 inch down from the underside of the deck, and that will give us the top of the clamp. So now you know where your head rod is going to line up, your head rod clamp will line up. And then taking one of your clamps, line it up and mark the holes for pre-drilling. Pre-drill those. So I'm going to pre-drill these holes to prevent splitting. I don't want the wood to split. And now I will mount the first head rod clamp. And that is the first head rod clamp mounted. Now, so we'll come here and repeat the process. We'll find the edge of our shade, which is 1 inch away, usually from the and then 12 inches in again from that mark, and then 1 inch down to the top of the head rod clamp. And then again, using the head rod clamp, we will mark our holes for pre-drilling. Make sure the clamp's level as you do this, or the head rod will not go into it correctly. Go ahead and pre-drill. So the screws we're using to mount the head rod clamps are number 12s with a 5/16 hex head on the top. So the driver you'll need to drive these screws is a 5/16 hex driver. And we're just going to put these into the holes we pre-drilled. Now we'll split the difference between these two clamps and find our central head rod clamp. And to measure for this, you'll just measure the distance from that head rod clamp to this one and divide it in half. And like I said, this one is 8 feet, so we need to come 48 inches over to the center. The drill bit I'm pre-drilling with is a 5/32 drill bit. So now we're going to mount the guide ring, which guides the rope. Normally we'll level off from this ring over and then straight up from the tie-off cleats, which in this instance we can't. So the next best option is going to be on this surface here, and you want to get that pretty close to level. It doesn't have to be perfect. And make your mark and then pre-drill this hole as well. And mount your guide ring. And this guide ring is going to help you run your ropes, which we will run the ropes after we mount the tie-off cleats, which that's what we're going to measure for now. Tie-off cleats normally run 4 feet and 6 feet off the ground. If you can't do 4 feet or 6 feet off the ground, we recommend at least 24 inches between the two cleats. And again, if you can't do 24 inches, 18 inches is probably the minimum that I would go to mount those. Go ahead and mark and pre-drill these as well. Now we're ready to rope the shade. So now we're going to run the rope through the guide rings, and you want to go through the first guide ring here, run it towards the first head rod clamp, and then through that one. And if you can reach this center one, go through there next. And we're going to work our way all the way down to the farthest one first. I'm going to pull enough rope so it doesn't fall out of there. I'm going to adjust my ladder so I can reach the next one. So we're going to run it through the last guide ring. And then if you look here on this clamp, there's a little eye that the rope's going to go through. And then comes directly from the guide ring through that eyelet. Careful not to twist up any of the rope here, and then just put your basic knot there and pull that rope tight. And now what you're going to do is you're going to pull the rope until you get approximately about where your shade is going to end. It's always better to pull a little extra rope before you cut it so you don't cut it too short. So you'll take your rope and you'll figure eight it around this cleat. 1, 2, on the third time, put what's called a cleat hitch in it, snug the rope up, and then you're going to cut it at the top of the next cleat. And then go ahead and burn the end of that so it doesn't fray, and tie the same knot in it, which you'll end up doing again later to trim the ropes all to length. So again, you're just going to follow the same pathway through the guide rings. And then make sure that as you pull this one through, you go behind that first rope so they don't tangle. Repeat this process, feeding the rope through the little eyelet on the head rod clamp, tying a simple knot in it. Give it a good pull to make sure your knot holds, and then again pulling your rope. And we'll do the same thing on the cleat. 2, 3. And then we will run our last rope through the same eyelet. And now we're ready for the next step, where we slide the shade through the ropes. Now we're gonna insert the shade into the ropes, but before we do that, go ahead and pull them to a height that's comfortable for you. I usually do it about chest high. Tie your ropes off. Again with the cleat hitch, make sure that they can't come down. And then this part's important. If you do this wrong or they get twisted, the shade won't work. So make sure they are not twisted. And it's a little bit breezy today, so you'll notice they will get twisted. So you just have to be careful as you insert the shade. And then I'm going to skip this first one, come through the second one. Go back to the first one, and if it gets twisted, make sure it's untwisted. Then line those up as best you can underneath the head rod clamps and guide rings. And now next I'm going to take the head rod here and get it into the clamps up there, and to make that easier, I'm going to pull it up to within about 6 inches of the head rod clamps. Somewhere in there. And now, to make this easier, I'm going to start in the center. Mount the center one first. So now just take the head rod, push it up into there. It's got a nice groove in there for it. And then using the wing nut, tighten the clamp, make sure the clamp is straight so the head rod will clamp properly. And then if the shade is centered, take some pliers and just snug that wing nut up. Don't over tighten it or you'll strip the threads on it. So after you get the center one clamped, repeat the same thing on the remaining head rod clamps. Then again, using pliers to snug that wing nut so it doesn't come loose. You'll notice I'm only doing about a quarter turn there because we don't want to over tighten it. So now we've got the head rod mounted, clamped in there. We are gonna let the curtain down so we can measure for our anchor cleats. And I'm just gonna tie those off real quick. And so from the bottom of the curtain, the minimum that you wanna measure down is 3 inches. You can go more than that, which in this case we came down 8 inches. But the minimum is 3. You don't want to be shorter than 3 inches down from here. And I'm going to take my anchor cleat and mount that here into some holes that I already have pre-drilled. Since it's a bit breezy, I'm going to tie this off the same way. Actually, these ones aren't. Might do this one a little different. Using that same cleat hitch. So we're going to measure down 3 inches, which this side is 3 inches. And we've got some longer screws here to make sure we get into some good substance behind the stucco. And then we're gonna, let's tie off here as well. And that concludes the installation of your shade. Thank you for choosing SugarHouse Industries.